By the beginning of 1915, many people still believed the war would end within months. The soldiers who had marched off to battle in the summer of 1914 had been promised victory by Christmas. Politicians spoke confidently. Generals planned decisive offensives. Newspapers predicted triumph. Instead, Europe entered a new year, trapped in a nightmare. From the coast of Belgium to the border of Switzerland, thousands of miles of trenches cut across the continent like open scars. The rapid movements of 1914 had disappeared. The front lines had frozen. Millions of men now faced each other across narrow stretches of muddy ground that would soon become known as no man's land. The First World War was no longer a war of movement. It was becoming a war of endurance. As winter gripped the Western Front, soldiers struggled to survive conditions that were often as dangerous as enemy fire. Trenches filled with water, boots sank into thick mud, rats fed on scraps and corpses, disease spread through crowded dugouts, artillery shells exploded day and night, shaking the earth beneath exhausted men. Yet despite the misery, commanders on both sides remained convinced that a breakthrough was possible. Again and again, attacks were launched. Again and again, they failed. Machine guns and artillery dominated the battlefield. Whenever soldiers climbed from their trenches and advanced across open ground, they were met with devastating fire. Thousands could die in a matter of hours for only a few hundred yards of territory. The Western Front had become a deadly stalemate. But in the spring of 1915, the Germans introduced a weapon that shocked the world. On April 22nd, near the Belgian city of Ypres, Allied soldiers noticed something unusual drifting toward their positions. At first, it looked like a strange greenish-yellow cloud moving across the battlefield. Then the coughing began. The Germans had released nearly 170 tons of chlorine gas from thousands of cylinders hidden along their lines. As the cloud rolled forward, soldiers struggled to understand what was happening. The gas burned their eyes and lungs. Men gasped desperately for air. Some collapsed where they stood, others fled in panic. For the first time in modern warfare, poison gas had been used on a massive scale. The attack created a gap in the Allied lines and demonstrated that science and industry were now transforming warfare in terrifying ways. Soon both sides would develop gas masks and their own chemical weapons. A new era of warfare had begun. Yet while Europe focused on the trenches of France and Belgium, another dramatic campaign was unfolding hundreds of miles away. The leaders of Britain and France were searching for a way to break the deadlock. They believed the answer might lie in the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had entered the war on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary in late 1914. Its territory controlled the strategic Dardanelles Strait, a narrow waterway connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Black Sea. If the Allies could capture the strait, they could open a supply route to Russia and possibly force the Ottoman Empire out of the war. The plan seemed bold and potentially decisive. In February 1915, Allied warships began attacking Ottoman defenses along the Dardanelles. But the operation quickly ran into trouble. Mines sank several ships. Coastal artillery inflicted heavy damage. The naval assault failed. Rather than abandon the campaign, Allied leaders made a fateful decision. They would invade the Gallipoli Peninsula. On April 25th, thousands of British, French, Australian, and New Zealand troops landed on the rugged coastline. What followed became one of the most famous campaigns of the entire war. The invading forces expected a relatively quick advance. Instead, they encountered determined Ottoman resistance. The steep hills overlooking the beaches gave defenders a powerful advantage. Machine guns and artillery swept the landing zones. Soldiers fought under intense heat, limited water supplies, and constant enemy fire. Among the Ottoman commanders was a talented officer named Mustafa Kemal. Recognizing the importance of the high ground, he rushed troops into critical positions and helped halt the Allied advance. The campaign soon settled into trench warfare, remarkably similar to the fighting on the Western Front. Month after month, both sides endured terrible casualties. Despite repeated attacks, the Allies failed to achieve a breakthrough. By the end of the year, the campaign was abandoned. Gallipoli had become a costly disaster, yet the war continued to expand. In May 1915, another major power entered the conflict. Italy had originally been part of the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary. But when war began in 1914, Italy chose not to join its allies. Instead, Italian leaders negotiated with both sides, seeking the best deal. The Allies promised territorial gains if Italy entered the war against Austria-Hungary. The offer proved irresistible. On May 23, Italy declared war on Austria-Hungary. A new front opened across some of the most challenging terrain in Europe. The fighting took place in the Alps and along the Isonzo River. Soldiers battled on steep mountainsides, icy ridges, and narrow valleys. Entire armies struggled to move supplies through harsh conditions. Avalanches, freezing temperatures, and rugged terrain often killed as many men as combat itself. The entrance of Italy further widened a conflict that was already consuming much of the continent. Meanwhile, events in Eastern Europe were taking a dramatic turn. Unlike the trenches of the Western Front, the Eastern Front covered vast distances. Armies maneuvered across enormous territories. Battles involved hundreds of thousands of soldiers. And in 1915, Russia faced a growing crisis. Germany and Austria-Hungary launched a powerful offensive near Gorlitz and Tarnów in modern-day Poland. The attack was supported by overwhelming artillery fire and careful planning. Russian defenses quickly began to collapse. Entire sections of the front crumbled under pressure. As Central Powers forces advanced, Russian armies were forced into a massive retreat. Cities fell one after another. Poland was lost, Lithuania was occupied. Millions of civilians fled the advancing armies. The retreat became one of the largest military withdrawals in modern history. By the end of the campaign, Russia had suffered staggering losses in men, equipment, and territory. Although the Russian Empire remained in the war, confidence in its leadership was badly shaken. The consequences would be felt for years to come. Yet perhaps no single event of 1915 had a greater impact on American public opinion than what happened in the Atlantic Ocean. For months, German submarines had been attacking ships around the British Isles. Germany argued that Britain's naval blockade threatened its survival and that merchant vessels could be legitimate targets. But submarine warfare created a dangerous problem. Submarines often attacked without warning, and civilians could easily become victims. On May 7, 1915, the British passenger liner Lusitania was sailing from New York to Liverpool. Nearly 2,000 passengers and crew were aboard. Off the coast of Ireland, a German U-boat spotted the ship. A torpedo was launched. Moments later, an explosion rocked the vessel. The Lusitania began sinking rapidly. Passengers rushed to lifeboats as panic spread across the decks. Within minutes, the great ocean liner disappeared beneath the waves. Nearly 1,200 people lost their lives. Among the dead were 128 Americans. News of the disaster spread quickly across the United States. Newspapers carried dramatic headlines. Many Americans viewed the sinking as an attack on innocent civilians. Although the United States remained neutral, public attitudes toward Germany became increasingly negative. The sinking of the Lusitania did not bring America into the war immediately, but it marked an important turning point. The relationship between the United States and Germany would never be quite the same again. By the end of 1915, the First World War had grown far beyond the expectations of those who had started it. The conflict stretched across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the world's oceans. New technologies were reshaping battlefields. Poison gas had entered warfare. Submarines threatened global shipping. Industrial production fueled armies on a scale never seen before. The casualties continued to mount. Millions had already been killed, wounded, or captured. Yet no side was close to victory. The quick war that leaders had promised in 1914 was gone forever. In its place stood a vast struggle of nations, industries, and entire societies. As winter returned once again to Europe, soldiers huddled in frozen trenches and wondered how much longer the war could possibly continue. They could not know that even greater horrors lay ahead. The battles of 1916 would bring destruction on a scale the world had never witnessed. Verdun, the Somme, Brusilov, Jutland, names that would soon become symbols of sacrifice and suffering. But as 1915 came to an end, one truth was already impossible to ignore. The First World War was no longer a European crisis. It had become a global catastrophe, and the worst was yet to come.